The race for the White House just got one day closer, and tonight it's shaping up to be a battle of the sexes.
Is he the greatest personality? No, but I'm not voting for personality. I'm voting for policy.
Women's health is pretty much a big reason why I'm voting for her.
While the election for president remains neck and neck, the gender gap could be responsible for the tight contest, with the disparity between female and male voters only widening in the days leading up to Election Day, with women largely favoring Democrats and men increasingly supporting Republicans, and it's upending the American political system.
This is very important for my community, for our city, and for our country.
With 30 million votes already cast as of tonight, the question now, can either candidate win over voters from the other gender?
My vote is going to go for President Trump.
When it comes to Kamala, I believe she is for the people, middle class, and health care is a big issue with us.
Why are men overwhelmingly going for Trump and the GOP? Why are suburban moms squarely with Harris and the Democrats? And what does each presidential candidate need to do to win?
We gotta go vote.
If you don't vote, you don't get nowhere, and then you complain.
This is our ABC News Live primetime coverage, the race for the White House. Good evening, everyone. I'm Linsey Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us. And this edition of Race for the White House, where we'll be covering every political twist and turn leading up to Election Day. But tonight, the star-studded rally, Bruce Springsteen, Tyler Perry, Barack Obama hitting the campaign trail with Kamala Harris in Georgia as the clock ticks down until Election Day. With just 12 days to go, Donald Trump is in Arizona and set to appear tomorrow on the incredibly popular Joe Rogan podcast. That's in an apparent effort to appeal to the many young men who listen to that podcast. Tonight, we are taking a special look at the widening gender gap. Men who are more likely to vote for Donald Trump and women who are more likely to vote for Kamala Harris. What impact will this ultimately have on the race? And is this gap now more pronounced than it was in 2020? More than 30 million Americans have already cast their votes. What do those numbers tell us about the electorate? We do begin with those comments by former President Donald Trump. The former president has vowed that if he's reelected, he would immediately target special counsel Jack Smith. And after CNN invited both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump to a debate or a town hall, Trump said no to both. Harris showed up to make her case in front of undecided voters. What she promised. Our team is standing by to break it all down. We begin with our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, on the trail in Georgia.
Tonight, Donald Trump declaring that if he's reelected, one of his first orders of business will be to fire the special counsel prosecuting him for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Trump saying getting rid of Jack Smith will be, quote, one of the first things addressed.
It's so easy. I would fire him within 2 seconds.
In an interview later today, Trump saying Smith should be, quote, thrown out of the country. Tonight, Kamala Harris's campaign hitting back, saying Donald Trump thinks he's above the law. And these latest comments are right in line with the warnings made by Trump's former chief of staff that he wants to rule as a dictator with unchecked power. That former chief of staff, retired four-star General John Kelly, told the New York Times Trump fits the definition of a fascist and would love to rule as a dictator himself.
Oh, I think he'd love to be. I think he'd love to be just like he was in business. He could tell people to do things and they would do it, and not really bother too much about whether what the legalities were.
As a retired general, Kelly doesn't endorse candidates, but he says he's speaking out now because Trump has vowed to go after his political enemies using the military if necessary, calling them the enemy within. At a CNN town hall, Harris urging voters to heed his warning.
I think one has to think about, why would someone who served with him, who is not political, a four-star Marine general, why is he telling the American people now? And frankly, I think of it as he's just putting out a 911 call to the American people. Understand what could happen if Donald Trump were back in the White House. And this time, we must take very seriously those folks who knew him best and who were career people are not going to be there to hold him back.
That town hall held in place of a proposed debate. Harris had agreed to participate, but Trump refused. Today, Harris taking note.
Yet again, Trump not showing up, refused to be
a part of a CNN debate.
And zeroing in on her campaign's closing message that Trump is a danger to the country.
Either you have the choice of a Donald Trump who will sit in the Oval Office, stewing, plotting revenge, retribution, writing out his enemies list, or what I will be doing, which is responding to folks like the folks last night with a to-do list.
Today in North Carolina, Harris's running mate Tim Walz telling young voters to beware of Trump's threats to go after his enemies.
Look, I recognize I'm on the top of his list, but don't kid yourself. You're somewhere on that list, too, if you disagree with these people. That's who they are.
And late this evening, Trump lashing out at John Kelly, who was his longest-serving chief of staff, and before that, his Secretary of Homeland Security.
I realized I didn't like him, pretty quickly and was stopping paying attention. But he was a bully who made up stories.
Minutes later, Trump firing up a crowd of supporters in Tempe, Arizona.
This is going to be the biggest and most important election ever. It's going to be the biggest political event, I believe, in our country's history. We have to win. And we don't need it for the big political event. We need it to save our country.
Both campaigns are saying that they are about saving this country. Let's get right to Mary Bruce there in Atlanta, Georgia. Mary, the vice president showed up last night after CNN invited both Harris as well as Donald Trump to debate or to a town hall. Trump said no to both. Kamala Harris did show up in front of those undecided voters in Pennsylvania. Tell us about some of the promises she made to them.
Well, first and foremost, she promised that she will be a president for all Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents. It's a message I suspect she will reiterate here tonight in Atlanta. She's appearing here on the trail for the first time alongside former President Barack Obama. Lindsay.
And, of course, Mary, the campaign has some high-profile surrogates and celebrities in the coming days, including a rally tomorrow night in Texas. And you remember you were there at the DNC. There was a lot of buzz that this performer was going to show up, and it seems like it's going to happen tomorrow.
It is going to happen, I can tell you, and I am not biased about this. It is a big one. Beyonce will be appearing tomorrow night alongside Kamala Harris in Houston. She's bringing out as many stars and heavy hitters as she can in these final days. Tonight, she's appearing with Bruce Springsteen. Spike Lee is here. Tyler Perry is here. Tomorrow night in Houston, in addition to Beyonce, Willie Nelson will be out. So she's pulling out all the stops, Lindsay.
Sure is. All right. Mary Bruce for us in Atlanta. Thanks so much, Mary. As we mentioned, Kamala Harris held that rally in Georgia today that included a performance from the boss, Bruce Springsteen.
Well, big wheels roll through fields where sunlight streams.
President Barack Obama and actor and filmmaker Tyler Perry also came out on the stage. The first time Obama and Harris have campaigned together this election cycle. Vice President Harris spoke directly to women about the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
Ours is a fight for the future, and it is a fight for freedom. For freedom, like the fundamental freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do.
538's Galen Druk joins us now. And Galen, we want to talk specifically tonight about the gender gap in this election. Give us a sense of the disparity between the male and female voters in 2024.
So looking at the polls conducted in October alone, an average of them, the gender gap appears to be 18 percentage points, which is that women favor Harris by 10 percentage points and men favor Trump by 8 percentage points. So it's pretty evenly matched, although, of course, the advantage goes to Harris. But on top of that, if you had to choose which gender you would rather do better with, I think you would choose women. Because if American elections were a battle of the sexes, women would win. They turn out at higher rates than men. So in 2020, for example, 52% of the electorate was female and 48% was male. So she has both the advantage in terms of, how big her gap is, but also the advantage because she's doing better with the sex that turns out at a higher rate.
What happened with the gender gap in 2020?
The data is a little mixed. You know, this is always an imperfect science because if you look at the exit polls of 2020, it looks like the gender gap was huge by like 23 percentage points. But if you look at some of the verified voter studies after the fact, and we're getting really nerdy here, but it looked like the gender gap was not so big. So Biden won women by 11 percentage points. And Trump only won men by 2 percentage points. So it looks like compared to 2020, in 2024, we're heading towards a larger gender gap. And perhaps that's not surprising. Of course, we don't have two men running against each other. And in 2016, when we had Trump, a man, and Hillary Clinton, a woman, running against each other, we did see a massive gender gap approaching 26 percentage points in that election, looking at those verified voter surveys after the fact.
Is there a difference based on age when it comes to that breakdown of gender?
Oh boy, there is. And this is a new dynamic in American politics. We often think of American politics as stuck in the mud. Things don't really change. People are either red or blue, and that's how they'll be forever. But if you look at what's happening to 18 to 29-year-olds in America today, we are seeing a gulf, which is that young women are becoming much more liberal. And that's probably intuitive, right? Maybe they're concerned about reproductive rights and the likes. I mean, we've known that Trump has been very unpopular with that part of the electorate for a long time. There was an NBC News poll that came out today that showed Harris leading by 30 percentage points or more with that part of the electorate. On the other hand, young men appear to be shifting to the right. This is a part of the electorate that Biden won by about 10 percentage points in 2020. In the latest New York Times Siena College poll, Trump is leading with that group by 17 percentage points. Now, look, these samples are small, and there's disagreement in the polls in terms of how much Trump may be leading with this group or if he's leading at all. But what we can say is that compared to that top line number that I mentioned before, overall in America, the gender gap being 18 percentage points, for young men and women, we're looking at something much larger.
Always love your enthusiasm about the numbers, Galen Drake. A pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is and historically has been a gender gap in politics, and that gap could be historic during this year's presidential election as young women line up behind Kamala Harris's bid to become the first female president in the United States. Rachel Bay joins us now to help us understand how this gap has widened. Rachel, why do more women, including moms, tend to vote for Democrats?
Well, a lot of that, Lindsay, is concern about Donald Trump. The first thing we hear over and over again when it comes to the gender gap is temperament. Women don't like the divisive rhetoric that Donald Trump has been using over the past few years, and they especially don't like it when that divisive rhetoric is aimed at other women. I'm talking about Republican women who don't like it when Donald Trump calls Kamala Harris dumb, when he calls her stupid, when people like J.D. Vance make fun of, quote, childless cat ladies, as if there's a problem with women deciding not to have kids. The other big issue, obviously, Lindsay, is abortion. A lot of women across the country concerned about reproductive rights. And we're not just talking about Democratic women here. We're not just talking about those suburban moms who are often those swing voters who decide elections. Also, white working class women who traditionally vote for Donald Trump. A lot of these folks are pro-choice, and they have a lot of concern about reproductive rights.
But on the flip side, how has Donald Trump appealed to young men on the campaign trail?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting strategy, Lindsay, and one that the media here in Washington has only sort of caught on in recent weeks. Donald Trump has been doing a lot of bro-y sort of podcasts, I've been calling them. These are podcasts a lot of men listen to, podcasts with wrestlers, podcasts with football players. He's been showing up at UFC fights, going to football games, frat houses, also speaking about UFC, championships, his favorite games. What the Trump campaign is trying to do is sort of humanize him and make him seem like somebody you would want to be buddies with, somebody you'd want to crack open a beer with. And we have seen from talking to, people who are doing these focus groups with voters that this is working with men, that a lot of them think he's cool, and they want to sort of think of themselves or think of him as somebody who they could be friends with. And that's working, Lindsay.
And how can Harris appeal more to young men?
Well, a couple things she's been doing right now, Lindsay. I mean, just a few days ago, actually, we saw President Barack Obama go to Detroit and specifically scold black men, some of whom are saying they're going to actually turn from Harris and vote for Donald Trump. He was trying to say, listen, what are you thinking? You'd back a person who has said racist things in the past. You should be backing the woman who would be the first black female president in the United States. She also had Eminem come out when she was in Detroit and introduce her, obviously very popular with men.
Is it too late? Do you think that there's anything that Trump could do at this point to appeal more to women?
Well, he certainly tried, Lindsay. I mean, he put out this idea of giving everyone free IVF. I mean, as somebody who has gone through 5 rounds of IVF, I know how expensive it is. And the fact that, you know, a lot of people can't even afford it unless their insurance covers it. And a lot of people's insurance don't cover that. So that is something that I think a lot of women and men actually care about and are interested in. But here's the thing. A lot of women saw that and said, look, you're just pandering to me to try to get my vote. Democrats have put bills like this on the floor in Congress, and it was Republicans who killed them. So, look, they're not stupid, and they're not buying that, Lindsay.
Rachel Bade, our thanks to you as always.
Of course.
And still to come, Arizona's 2020 election was plagued by debunked claims of voter fraud and a stolen election. Secretary of State Adrian Fontes joins us next to talk about trying to balance the election while battling disinformation. Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, former President Trump is campaigning in Arizona, and it's all eyes on that key battleground state. Joining us now is Arizona's Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes. Secretary, thank you so much for your time tonight in what, of course, is a super busy time for you as well as your office. Let's start with the news today that a man set a United States Postal Service mailbox on fire in Phoenix. 20 ballots were damaged. Your response to this incident?
Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me, and thanks to the quick responses from local fire at the Phoenix Fire Department, police, and their cooperation with the United States Postal Service. It's my understanding that none of the ballots were damaged enough that they were not recognizable or collectible, so that we could make sure that those voters who may have had ballots that were damaged sufficiently couldn't get new ones and still be able to vote. So we're very thankful for those folks who we've been coordinating with for some time to make sure we've got safe elections.
Early voting has now been underway for more than 2 weeks. Has everything gone smoothly and according to plan? Do you anticipate the turnout will top 2020?
I'm not sure the turnout's going to top 2020. We had a heck of a year a few years ago when it came to that presidential election. It was COVID, and early voting was a little bit healthier than it is right now. That having been said, excitement for the candidates is much higher now. And frankly, we've got more voters now. So we may very well top those numbers. We'll see what ends up happening once we get done counting all of the ballots sometime after Election Day.
But everything going smoothly so far?
Certainly no major incidents to speak of at this time. And frankly, even that post office box that we talked about earlier was not related to any candidate or political ideology that we are aware of.
After the 2020 Arizona election filled with debunked claims of voter fraud and a stolen election, you've said this time Arizona is, quote, the center of the storm when it comes to election denialism. How hard is it to run an election smoothly when you're battling disinformation on so many fronts?
Well, as long as we stick with the fundamentals, we're going to be okay. And that's what we've been preparing for, since I took office as secretary back in January of 2023, with a county-centric approach. And the counties are the ones who run our elections here in Arizona. We've been able to garner a lot of the resources that they need, give them the support they need to get the fundamentals right. That's what the voters deserve, and that's what they're going to get. A lot of the shenanigans and the other, antics, the conspiracy theories and things of this nature, they're more of a distraction. We try to absorb as much of that as we can here at the Secretary's office so the good folks in county government can get the job done for our voters.
How long do you anticipate it'll take Arizona to finish counting the majority of its ballots?
Well, it's going to take about as long as it usually has. It always has, but people didn't notice when we had wide margins on one side of the political aisle. We are politically a much tighter state right now and of much more consequence. So folks get a little bit anxious when it takes us the typical amount of time to get our ballots counted. I think the networks will be making their projections around the same time they did back in 2020, some of them earlier and some of them later. But those projections are just that. The official numbers will come in, we expect, about 10 to 13 days after the election is over.
Is there anything that keeps you up at night with regard to the election ahead?
The one thing that keeps me up at night is the fact that we still have elected officials and candidates in Arizona who are lying about our elections. They're continuing to spread conspiracy theories and mythologies. They're continuing without any evidence whatsoever to challenge the veracity, the integrity, and the honor of all of the folks, their own neighbors, who are the ones that run these elections. That's what keeps me up at night. I'm hoping for a day soon when we can get back to trusting one another as Americans, that we will do our job.
What would you say to those who are not trusting of the process, the democratic process, and are concerned about the potential for violence on Election Day?
Well, first and foremost, I'd say ask the legitimate questions. If you are curious about the process, come to the county websites. There's a lot of FAQs. There's a lot of reports. There's a lot of folks out there who are more than happy to explain the process. In fact, come and take a tour. We've got a lot of our counties who, in fact, I think all of them are happy to bring folks in and let them walk around, not while there's ballots, of course, but look at what is happening and ask those real questions. Once you see the real questions, then look to the fact that our elections are run by regular Americans just like you and me. They're folks who want to do a good job. They believe in their oath. They believe in all of us as citizens, and they believe in our democracy.
Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, we thank you so much for your time, Secretary.
Thanks for having me.
Joining us once again tonight is Democratic strategist Kaivan Shroff and ABC News political contributor Sarah Isker. Thank you both so much for joining us. I want to return briefly to our theme for this half hour, the gender gap that's being revealed in a number of the polls. More women supporting Harris, more men supporting Trump. First question for you, Kaivan. Is there a subgroup of men in particular that the Harris campaign believes it can still pick up votes from?
Harris. Sorry, looks like I was muted. Looks like I think Vice President Harris, right, in these past few days has rolled out specific policy plans for Latino men, for Black men. Those are important groups for her to have turnout in high numbers. And I think there was a lot of positive reaction there, you know, specifically focusing for Black men on the idea that so often we talk about policies and politics for Black men through the lens of criminal justice system and criminal justice reform. She's talking about so much else, a holistic view on what it means to be a Black man in America and how she's going to help lift that demographic up. So that was very powerful.
And Sarah, more broadly speaking, sometimes groups of voters don't show up on Election Day in the numbers that were expected. What groups are each campaign most concerned about not showing up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Harris campaign at this point has to be concerned about some of these distant voters. Black men, for instance. She's going to win Black men. The question is, can Trump peel off 15, 20% of Black men? That would be catastrophic for the Harris campaign. Or will they simply stay home, which is, of course, half as bad? On the Trump side, of course, they are very concerned about those suburban voters who do not like Harris, but feel deeply uncomfortable with Donald Trump. And whether Harris has been able to move some of those voters with her tour with Liz Cheney, for instance, has yet to be seen.
And Kaivan, same question to you. What side would you say that both campaigns are concerned will not show up?
Well, I think that the Trump campaign has to be worried that those suburban white women who elected him, frankly, in 2016 will not show up this election. And all signs are pointing that way. And I think adding J.D. Vance to the ticket really made it so that the campaign could not walk back that perception from those female voters. I think with men, you know, yes, we will see. Will they show up to elect the first female president of the United States? And I think the one message that sort of both campaigns have danced around, and I think the Harris campaign would be well served to lean into, as she did go on that Call Her Daddy podcast, which I think, I don't know if the common viewer knows, really did start out as more of a sex podcast. And so sex is also on the ballot when you talk about access to abortion, to contraception. You know, Republicans have shown in every way they want to be in your bedroom making those decisions. And I think that's actually a message that, of course, resonates with women, but it resonates with men. It's not Kamala Harris's job to get you a girlfriend, but she does want to keep the Republican Party out of your bedroom.
And with such little time left at this point to campaign, do you think that the better tactic now for each campaign is to focus on all 7 swing states, or is it smarter to lock up just the few that they feel that maybe they have a chance of winning? And Sarah, we'll start with you.
Well, part of what we saw in 2016 and 2020 is that those undecided voters, and there's not many of them left at this point, but they all went one direction in 2016 for Donald Trump, and they all went one direction in 2020 for Joe Biden. And that's why I don't think you see these candidates really focused on one state in particular. Yes, I think we have a sense that this campaign could turn on Pennsylvania, but more likely than not, one of these two candidates will actually win most of these swing states, and we may actually know this fairly early in the night.
And many voters don't pay attention until an election, really until now, just about now. What are the issues that each campaign will keep hitting over and over between now and Election Day? Kayvon.
And I think it will be abortion, absolutely, for Democrats, but you are also seeing them ramp up the criticism of Trump for his embrace of Hitler, as said by his own chief of staff. The threat of fascism. You heard Harris repeatedly say at tonight's rally, this isn't 2016, this isn't 2020. To borrow a line from Secretary Clinton, Kamala Harris is the last thing standing between American democracy and the apocalypse.
What do you think, Sarah, to you, in the last few days, if you were giving some strategy advice to the Trump campaign, what would you say that they need to do at this point?
Donald Trump wins when his base is excited, when they see Donald Trump being Donald Trump. I think that's why the McDonald's stunt was one of the more effective stunts we've seen this cycle. I think they see Harris on her heels at this point. The vibe shift seems to have moved in Trump's favor. They obviously feel very excited about that. So they have the enthusiasm on their side at this point. The problem is that the Harris team actually has the get out the vote boots on the ground. And so the Trump team is going to be behind when it comes to the actual moving of voters to the polls on Election Day, potentially.
And Kayvon, your strategy that you would advise to the Harris campaign in the last 12 days?
Well, I think Sarah's right. They do have not only the resources, but the manpower to be, to your question about do you campaign in all 7 states, absolutely everywhere all at once. And I think simultaneously she's making that case that Trump's too exhausted to do that. So I don't think we'll see Trump have a 7-state strategy the way we will see Democrats execute that. And we've seen him even canceling earlier this week some scheduled campaign events. So that is also a message that resonates with undecided voters, those voters who were concerned about how Joe Biden was coming across, who may identify as more moderate, but are uncomfortable watching Trump sway 40 minutes back and forth on that rally stage.
Kayvon Shroff, Sarah Isker, appreciate both of your time tonight. Thanks so much. And that's our Race for the White House coverage for this hour. I'm Linsey Davis. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us.